like a Hellcat.
Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another Sega Saturn review. Now you may or may not be aware I ran a poll last week to determine what racing game you wanted to see reviewed next on the channel. The choices were the Need for Speed, Road Rash and Scorcher, and whilst it initially looked like Scorcher was going to come out on top, by the end of the polling time Road Rash pips it, which means this week's review is of course Road Rash. In terms of its console lifespan, Road Rash had nearly a 10-year career, so to speak. Starting out in 1991 with Road Rash, we went all the way up to the year 2000 with Road Rash Jailbreak on the PlayStation, with versions for many other consoles in between: the Master System, the Game Gear, the 3DO, the Mega CD, obviously the PlayStation, the N64 and the Saturn all got different versions of Road Rash at some point or another. So like I always do, I'm going to be talking about the way the game looks, the way it sounds, the way it plays, talk about what kind of content and lifespan it's got, talk about whether it's still worth playing today, and if it can make our Sega Saturn top 10. Now in the looks department, there's one word that springs to mind after playing a considerable amount of Road Rash on the Saturn, and that is the word drab. I feel this game is not particularly exciting to look at whatsoever. I don't particularly like the pre-rendered sprites for the characters, for the cars, for the other bits and pieces of scenery on the tracks. I think they look dated. They do not look impressive. This game came out, I should say, in the middle of 1996 over here, and we'd seen far better racing games on the Saturn by now, and it really doesn't look too good. The 3D for the courses as well, not very impressive at all. Very bland, very repetitive. It's very difficult to say anything particularly good about the way that Road Rash looks. I feel the scenery on a lot of the levels is just so bland, so boring, and of course, like I said, very drab. The best thing about the game in terms of its looks and the way it runs is of course the way it runs. It runs pretty quick, pretty smooth in my opinion. It runs pretty well. The pop-up isn't too bad on this game. That's mainly down to the fact the scenery is so basic that there shouldn't really be any issues with pop-up whatsoever. The other thing I want to say about the way it looks is the horrible art style in the menus and in the big game mode and stuff. It just does not appeal to me whatsoever. I think the drawings of the characters that you can interact with are ugly, they are hideous. The game in general just doesn't have a nice art style in my opinion, and when you combine that with the fact the game in-game looks drab and boring too, in the visual aspect, Road Rash on the Saturn is not an appealing title. So moving on to sound effects and music, and I think I'm right in saying that Road Rash was one of the first games to have a licensed soundtrack by real bands, which is without a doubt a huge plus point for the game. In fact, it probably is the game's biggest strength. Some of these music tracks fit the game really well, and they're pretty decent to listen to when you're going through all the different menu screens. The unfortunate downside is none of these tracks play during the races, and this is where I've got some big criticisms for Road Rash. The sound effects and music within the races is nothing short of horrible. It is bland, it is repetitive, it is simplistic, it is simply not good to listen to. I could not believe it when I really spent some time playing this game that it is so boring to listen to. So not only is it boring in the graphics department, the racing soundtrack and sound effects are terribly boring as well, and for this I do feel the game suffers massively. So in terms of gameplay, it's pretty standard stuff. You've got an accelerate button, you've got a brake button, you can lean right and left with the L buttons, and you can punch and kick with the C button too. Unfortunately though, the game feels very boring to play. I've said this many times before, for as bad as a game may look, for as poor as a game may sound, it can be salvaged if it's a fun playing experience. But for me, unfortunately, Road Rash is just plain and simply boring. There's nothing here, in my opinion, that makes it stand above any of the other racing games on the system in terms of the way it plays. It feels very dated. It feels like you're playing a Mega Drive game, in all fairness, and the gameplay really hasn't advanced in any way, shape or form, so it really does suffer. And if you're trying to compare it with other racing games on the system in terms of the way it plays, it simply does not play as well or as fun as other games I've reviewed like Street Racer, Sega Rally, even Daytona USA, and I don't even like that, is more enjoyable to play than this. So in terms of the gameplay, Road Rash fails to deliver. So talking about content and lifespan, and Road Rash has two modes of play. It has Thrash mode and it has big game mode. Thrash mode is your arcade style gameplay where you simply pick a course, try and end in the top 3 to qualify. Once you qualify for all 5 races, you move on to level 2 where the courses become slightly harder, slightly longer, the AI is more aggressive, and so on until you try and get onto level 5. And if you can do that and win all of those races, then you definitely have my respect, because that's a challenge that I haven't done myself. So the main mode of play is the big game mode where you select a character and you go through the races earning money, trying to upgrade your motorcycle. There are quite a variety of motorcycles to pick from. Obviously more expensive ones are faster and so on. It's your standard sort of career mode, I guess is what you'd call it. You can interact with the other characters between races as well, and this is without a doubt where the main chunk of content is. The big question for me is whether you're going to find enough fun in the way the game plays to progress through the whole entire career mode or even the whole Thrash mode on all the different levels. For me, I just simply don't have the interest. I don't find the game enjoyable enough to play. Now another big criticism I suppose is lifespan is the fact it doesn't have 2-player split screen. It's got a 2-player mode where you can alternate taking it in turns, but for me, that really isn't a 2-player mode. Without a split screen, I think lifespan for racing games is always massively dampened down, and it really isn't there. I feel just about all racing games need to have a decent 2-player mode to really increase their lifespan. So in that regard, Road Rash doesn't do particularly well either. But content-wise, yes, there is some, but of course, it's a question of whether you enjoy the game enough to actually play through it all. So like always, that leaves us with our 2 final questions. Is Road Rash on the Saturn still worth playing today, and does it make our Sega Saturn top 10? Well, if you've listened to my review properly, you'll probably realize I'm going to say Road Rash isn't worth playing at all. It doesn't have anything majorly interesting or fun or enjoyable going for it to make you want to go back and visit it. And in terms of making the Sega Saturn top 10, I'm not sure it would even make a Sega Saturn top 10 racing games in perfect honesty, because I think every racing game I've probably looked at in my series so far, we've probably looked at about 70 PAL games altogether, and I would say Road Rash is probably the worst racing game I've reviewed. I feel Wipeout is better, I feel Street Racer is better, Impact Racing, both Daytonas, Sega Rally, they're all better. Max TT, although it doesn't have any content hardly, is a much more fun, better playing experience in this, and probably Hang On GP96 is better than this as well. So Road Rash just doesn't really do particularly well. I just feel its overall problem is the fact it feels very dated for the time it came out, and it is very boring to look at, to listen to, and to play, and there's some really big obstacles to overcome. But of course, as always, I'm interested in your opinions of Road Rash. I know that some people love this game and think it's absolutely fantastic. Now, reviews at the time were not particularly great either. I'd probably say it was a 6 out of 10 on average, looking at reviews from the time, and I feel that's probably about right. It just feels very average, and there's nothing here that makes it stand out above other racing games. But of course, they are my opinions and my thoughts. If yours differ, of course, like always, let me know with a comment down below, and I will be back in the near future with another Saturn review. Goodbye for now.